Looks like everybody can see my screen, which is great. So, hi everybody. Happy end of July. Today we're going to be talking about polls. We're going to be taking a little ride on the Pollercoaster, and we'll be focusing on the issues that matter this year and how to talk about them. So, just a little bit of a brief overview as to who I am and what Data for Progress does. My name is Danielle Deiseroth. I'm the executive director at Data for Progress. I've led our organization for about a year and a half. I previously was our climate data analyst, where I did most of our polling on climate, energy, and environmental issues. I started my career in market research. I spent a little bit of time on working for Bernie Sanders back in 2020. And some other fun facts about me: I split my time between DC and New York. I call Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania home. And outside of work, I love to cook, and I have two adorable kittens that keep me pretty busy. So this is Data for Progress. We are a progressive think tank and polling firm that works across the movement, across the progressive movement, to provide them with tools they need to fight for a more equitable future. We have an amazing team of data, technology, and communications experts who love polling and love to use data to illuminate the case for progressive policymaking. And you can find our work in major media outlets, different legislators, etc. So you may have come across some of our polls before in those ways. So we do a couple of things at Data for Progress. If you're familiar with polling at all, you're probably familiar with polling in the context of elections, understanding who might win the election. But today we're really going to focus on two other types of polling that Data for Progress also specializes in. Issue polling, understanding the popularity and the salience of certain key policy issues, as well as message testing, how to talk about these issues. So, as I said at the top, if you're just joining us, today's roadmap, we're going to be talking about the top issues on folks' minds in 2024 and how to use polling at the state and local level to help build power and do progressive policymaking at the state and local levels. So, to start, what are the issues that matter most to Americans right now? There's a little bit of an issue with issue polling, though, before we get started. Voters are complex. They care about many different issues, and a single polling question typically doesn't tell us the whole story. Polls are often also just a snapshot in time. They can tell us a great deal about how voters are feeling right then and there, but are also a product of the time period in which they're conducted. And then again, getting back to this first point, voters are complex. How do we understand when Americans are cross-pressured on multiple issues, where they care about many different issues to varying degrees and sometimes equal degrees? So we'll get into a little bit of all of that right now. So just to start, the survey that we're going to be walking through on the next few slides is very recent. We just conducted this just over a week ago from July 22nd to 23rd nationally. So this is looking at, again, the big picture, and we'll dive into some specific subgroups, but this is a national audience of about 1,250 likely voters. So when we say likely voters, we mean who do we think is going to actually turn out and vote this November? And we asked them in the voting booth, what are the issues that are most important to you? What's top of mind right now? And you see here, the top issue, as it has been for about the past 2 years, is the economy, jobs, and inflation, followed by immigration, threats to democracy, and programs like Social Security and Medicare. And then rounding out the top five is abortion. As you can see here, kind of lower down the list are some other issues, but really this is a common theme I'm going to repeat a couple of times. Folks are very concerned about economic costs right now, especially. And so inflation is very top of mind. Digging into some more specific subgroups, again, this is from the national level, but just taking a look at a slice of the data where we just look at voters of color, which include Black, Latino, and Asian American voters. They actually select the economy, jobs, and inflation as their top issue at even a higher rate than all voters overall. So All voters, about 30%, selected the economy, jobs, and inflation as their top issue. Among voters of color, that's 36%. But voters of color also were more likely to select threats to democracy as their second most important issue, as opposed to immigration, which was the second most important issue overall to all voters. And another interesting slice of the data here is looking just at young voters. So we're defining this as voters under 45. Again, very concerned about costs, selecting that as their top issue. But then the second most important issue to voters under 45 is actually abortion, and then followed by immigration. So we see abortion as a very key issue to these voters. And digging a little bit deeper on abortion, because this has been a huge issue, we know, at both the federal and the state level, there's a bit of a gender divide, which may or may not surprise you on how women versus men rank abortion as an important issue to them. So we see, both women and men rank the economy as their top issue, and then followed by immigration, but more women rank abortion as their top issue than men. So let's talk a little bit more about inflation. We at Data for Progress have been seeing in our surveys for a while that the economy, jobs, and inflation was consistently the issue that was selected most frequently as the most important issue. So we thought, let's dig a little bit deeper into this and what exactly, because the economy, jobs, and inflation is a pretty big bucket overall. So for any of the voters who selected the economy, jobs, and inflation as their most important issue, we showed them a second question where we said, okay, let's dig a little bit deeper here. Within this broad bucket called the economy, jobs, and inflation, what actually is driving that choice? And over half of those voters said inflation. So it's about costs. The rest of the voters were kind of split between creating jobs, economic growth, and wages. But again, just so clear cut that costs are just very top of mind for folks, really, as we saw in those previous slides, across different subgroups right now as well. And then we did another click deeper into, okay, now what does inflation mean to you? And this is where we had a really interesting finding where of those people who said the economy and then inflation, we asked specifically, what about inflation? And 2/3 of those voters who cited inflation as the driving reason why they think the economy is their most important issue is because of the cost of food and groceries, followed by the cost of rent or home prices. So we've really seen these sort of like weekly household kitchen table costs just consistently being very front of mind within this broader bucket of inflation. And so we wanted to dive a bit deeper into this story around grocery prices specifically because we saw, as those previous slides elaborated on, how narrowing in the problem is high costs that folks are paying at the grocery store. And so we wanted to understand a little bit how we could define some villains in this inflation story. And one of the more interesting findings that is here on the slide is that a plurality of voters say that corporate greed, corporate food manufacturers have a great deal of blame for high grocery prices. And we did a little bit of a messaging test. So we showed half of our sample, we said corporate food manufacturers. The other half, we actually specified who those corporate food manufacturers are, like PepsiCo, Frito-Lay, General Mills. And we didn't really see a difference between the two, just across the board. Corporations received the most ire. Not so much responsible. Folks didn't really connect climate change to high costs of food and groceries. And also, I think the lingering tail of the pandemic and sort of supply chain issues, specifically as it relates to groceries, folks don't really blame that as much as well. It's really this, concentrated blame on corporate grocery stores, corporate food manufacturers, and to a lesser extent, grocery stores. So then we tested some policies about high grocery prices and to assess support for some of those policies to combat high prices, corporate price gouging, and this concept of shrinkflation, the practice of companies reducing product sizes while maintaining the same price. So smaller bag, fewer chips, same price. And turns out voters really don't like that and want to fix it. So we see extremely strong bipartisan support for different policies, ranging from more transparency around quote unquote shrinkflation to greater enforcement and investigation of corporate price gouging in the food sector. Just so really, remarkably high support for these policies, which again is not too much of a surprise given how much voters are concerned about high grocery prices right now. So, like I said at the beginning of this presentation, today we're talking a lot about issue polling. So we've done this, this focus on the past few slides on inflation, the economy, on prices, and now taking a little bit of the zoomed out look. We at Data for Progress a few months ago, earlier this spring, took a look at a variety of different policies related to equality, justice, and economic security for working people. And I hope this is an encouraging finding to many of you. But a progressive legislative agenda is incredibly popular. There's, again, broad bipartisan support for protecting workers from extreme heat, from, again, here we see this again, taxing corporations with CEOs who are making 50x the median employee, reining in corporate spending and increasing the tax rate on corporations. So a lot of economic corporate greed style policies are extremely popular here, as well as policies to support working families, like providing free pre-K, investing in childcare, and just calling out those those policies for childcare in particular. Black voters, Latino voters, and Asian voters are more supportive of universal pre-K than just voters overall. So, we see that these policies are broadly popular across party lines and among different subgroups like young voters, women, voters of color. So keeping on this thread again and just sharing a few more of these overwhelmingly broad bipartisan, these policies that broad bipartisan support, increasing investments in public transportation, eliminating the sub minimum wage for workers with disabilities and teenagers, requiring tipped workers to be paid a minimum wage before tips. Again, so just really trying to showcase here that voters are broadly supportive of policies to help bolster working people and help alleviate, the pain in their pockets by, increasing their quality of life and also tackling corporate greed. So just a few key takeaways from this section on issue polling. We want to be a little bit nicer than the saying usually goes, but it's the economy friend. The economy, as we just showed in all of those slides, is just really resonating across demographic groups as a key issue. But that's not to mean we should forget about the importance of access to abortion and reproductive rights, protecting our democracy, which also continue to be major issues among voters, especially young voters and voters of color. A progressive economic legislative agenda is very popular. These policies command broad bipartisan support, especially when they're framed around lowering costs, raising wages, and holding big corporations accountable for not taking advantage of the American people. And finally, just breaking through apathy with empathy and action. I think this is a really important point because, we see in our surveys that voters, especially young people and people of color, are very pessimistic about the government and government actually working for them and taking up issues that, these voters actually care about. So to improve trust across the board, it's not enough to talk about the ways that we're, tackling corporate greed or tackling inflation, we can't forget to acknowledge the economic pain that folks are feeling right now and offer tangible solutions to help improve people's lives and lower the cost of living. So I'm just going to showcase a few case studies from the past year or so at Data for Progress that showcase how polling can be leveraged at the state and local level to build power. So this first one is a case study of a survey that we worked on with some partners with the Vermont Public Interest Research and Education Fund in Vermont around neonic pesticides. Now you might think neonic pesticides, that's a pretty niche and specific issue. Well, polling can be actually incredibly helpful to, dig deeper and to understand how voters do feel about some of these, very specific policies. And, what we found in this survey is that Vermont voters across party lines broadly supported phasing out neonic pesticides. And earlier this summer, Vermont actually became the second state in the nation to ban neonics. So in this case, we used polling to gain information about how Vermonters felt about this issue. There hadn't been any, polling or public data on this proposal to that point. So our poll helped illuminate opinions across the state, and this was really informative to legislators as they were looking to help pass this bill. The second case study that I want to showcase today is about social housing in New York City. So we're going from Vermont to a very different place, much more urban in New York City, where we've, as you saw in some of those previous slides, while folks are very concerned about food and grocery costs, the cost of housing is also really a concern to folks, especially to folks in the sort of, I would say, like elder millennial, Gen X age range. So we wanted to take a look at how New Yorkers and how New York City folks felt about solutions to New York City's housing crisis. And this poll, we found that there was broad bipartisan support for prioritizing affordable housing rather than housing that's a vehicle for corporate landlords to make a profit. And what we took a little bit of a different tactic with this poll. So whereas that previous case study with Vermont was really meant around educating key stakeholders and sort of like grass tops decision makers about how voters in Vermont felt about that very specific issue, this poll we conducted and we wanted to educate not only just grass tops but also grassroots. So we leveraged the power of the media to publish this poll and to socialize the findings in the media in New York to show that the case for social housing actually has broad bipartisan support. And finally, this last case study, we worked with our partners at Climate Power to survey Latino voters nationwide, including a deep dive of Latino voters in Arizona, Georgia, Nevada, and Pennsylvania. And this survey is a great case study in how, we were just like those past two case studies were, very specific to each location, Vermont versus New York. And in this one, yes, we did some specific geographic surveying, but we're really focused on the specific subgroup of Latino voters. So we offered the survey in both English and Spanish and did careful sampling to make sure we had a representative sample of Latino voters nationwide that spoke both English and Spanish. And what we found here is that Latino voters assign a great deal of blame to oil and gas executives and utility companies for high energy prices. So keeping that thread of corporate greed and blaming corporations for high prices, it's not unique to just food prices. It's also true in the energy sector. And this was an example of how we were able to dig a little bit more into the climate and clean energy side of things. So just some final key takeaways to maximize power building, and then I'm happy to answer any questions. Polling can really catalyze momentum when you're, in many cases, earned media around these polling results can help raise awareness and the salience of the issues that you're fighting for. Timing matters a lot. If you're thinking about conducting polling as part of your organizing or power building strategy, think about the timing and sort of work backwards from there. If you have a key date or a key event that you want to seize as an opportunity where you know you might have a lot of eyeballs or media attention, it's best to sort of synergize polling results with a major strategic event to make sure you sort of maximize the impact. And finally, sharing and amplifying your learnings with coalition partners is a great way to ensure that your data stays relevant over time. You can really squeeze a lot of life out of a poll between getting it cited in the media, to briefing coalition partners, to briefing legislators or other grasstops decision makers. There are a lot of ways to make sure you get the best bang for your buck if you're going into the field with a poll. So I also always encourage folks to sort of think about the outcomes and who you want to share that poll with before you actually go in and do the poll, because then you will be best set up for success with your outcomes.